you very much for inviting me to giving this winter lecture at this meeting. Thank you for your interest in the topic. I hope it will be a collaborative reflection, as I said in the title. The Padlet or the chat can be used, and I would be very happy if you comment on any point of the presentation, sharing your experience or your perspective, so we can have a discussion later on. The lecture should be about 45 minutes, more or less. You never know when you start talking, but that's the plan. And then the rest of the time we can talk about your comments and your perspective. As Livio said at the beginning, this is a continuation, so to say, of the roundtable we had in Helsinki, which went really well. I guess I enjoyed it very much, and therefore I want to start from there. And oh yeah, I also added here the QR code for the Padlet. If you still need to access the Padlet to leave the comments, you can just scan it with your phone and you'll get directly there. Yeah, back to Helsinki. So this is where it started, this conversation I had with Anna-Maret Otakoski and Pius Akumbo. Some of you were probably there, some others were not. So I will start summarizing a bit what came out of that discussion. So Pius comes from the Babanski speaking community in Cameroon, and he spoke about his own lived experience, very vivid. He gave us a very vivid experience. If you were there, you must remember. Witnessing when he was a child, foreign scholars going to his village in Cameroon and working and studying their language, his people. After all, he also became a scholar, went traveling the world, went back to his community, working on his own language. And he spoke about his journey, and he spoke about how he felt that no concrete improvement or change actually had affected his own community, while he had made, and so many other scholars had made, such a journey out of that academic work that came out. So he spoke about this contradiction quite a lot. Anna-Maret also spoke about her journey as an indigenous scholar, and she stressed very important points about the needs for communities, indigenous communities, also to decolonize themselves from what she described as a very intrusive colonial epistemology. So white scholars are not alone in this endeavor, and that kind of puts us back together on a similar space and help us find commonalities in this journey of decolonization. And she spoke about gatekeeping practices that are quite widespread in communities, and they are very much connected to language ideologies about what is a good language, what is a pure language, puristic ideologies about language that marginalize those within communities that kind of fail the language test, to quote Buchholz on this point. So those ideologies are very widespread, and we as foreigners, as Western scholars, or at least I speak for myself, are very much aware of that, and we should work together with indigenous people to not reinforce those ideologies, at least. And I will come back to that point later on. I also gave my contribution in Helsinki, and I spoke about my experience as a white linguist working with communities, first in sub-Saharan Africa on Nigerian Pidgin, and then in North America on Michif, and then Plains Cree. I really much focus on my own motivation and as an academic linguist, and about what I felt as unacceptable. So the unacceptability at this stage to simply treat indigenous and endangered languages like any other languages, like major languages that have a very different status. So a sort of cold-blooded attitude towards indigenous languages is not acceptable at this stage, at least in my perspective. So the question that I formulated in Helsinki, and that closed one of my contribution, is that a bit provocative, but do we dare go on with language work in these conditions with those communities when we are fully aware of the past, of the presence, of the imbalance in the power relations, and so on. I also spoke about what I strongly believe is a key point to address these issues. That is the focus on the learners and the heritage speakers that should take part in all language-related activities. That's my point, my opinion, and I will also come back to that point: the importance of involving learners in any language-related work on indigenous and endangered languages. So this was what was talked about in Helsinki, and Pius and Anna-Marit and Hai and Eva Sippola, who was the convener at that roundtable, who put us together and kind of coordinated and edited the work. We also published that conversation exactly in the way it went, with very, very minor editing. So if you are interested in that, it's published in the Journal of Postcolonial Linguistics. And in this presentation, I'd like to kind of take it up from where we left there in Helsinki, at least my strain of thoughts, and start with one of the core issue that I believe came up in that conversation. And I will do so by quoting a paper that was published in 2013 in the Journal of Language Documentation and Conservation, a paper by two American linguists that also received a reply to that paper was published 2 years later. So there is a conversation, of course, going on. And I will start by quoting some arguments from this very paper and try to add my perspective and start the conversation in that way. So the gist of that paper, and also I think what came out of the conversation in Helsinki, is this one, which is a quote from the paper itself, is that there is nothing, I mean, not what came out of a conversation in Helsinki, but I guess this is a very important point of discussion as it came out in Helsinki. There is nothing inherently unethical, and that's the point of the Crippen and Robinson, who published the paper, about a research program involving indigenous or endangered languages that is shaped primarily or even exclusively by the goals of the linguist. So Crippen and Robinson in that paper put forward the perspective of what they define as the go-it-alone model of the research, the linguist-led model of the research. So the go in, get the data, get out, publish. What I also defined in Helsinki as the pick a subject and do science approach that we can have towards indigenous languages. My reflection starts with three basic questions to counter-argument this point. And these are: what kind of motivation can sustain our work as a linguist if we want to have a sound work which is also ethical? So the why, what motivates us and our institutions to send us all over the world to collect data about languages and in what we define as fieldwork. And also a second question, what kind of methodologies are appropriate when we do that, and in what context do we want to embed those methodologies? So the how we do that. And also what kind of linguistic expertise matters when we work with endangered languages? So what do we bring to those communities? Is that an important point to us? That we have to bring something, and if yes, what exactly can we bring to make it relevant? So before addressing the Crippen and Robinson point, and before addressing my own core questions, I want to show this collection of pictures that I put together actually through AI, but every one of these pictures is actually based on real pictures, which include my own pictures with collaborators and people I met during my linguistic work. It also includes pictures of colleagues that I know and colleagues that I don't know. But I think these pictures all together tell a story, that this encounter that we have during our linguistic work is still very much linguist-centered. We are still very much focusing the work on our own priorities, and I think that is a point that should change. So I think with this, I've introduced enough the topic I want to talk to. And I will go on by quoting arguments that were mentioned by Crippen and Robinson in defense of the lone wolf approach paper of 2013 that I mentioned before, and giving some comments about them. The first quote is that Crippen and Robinson state that the goal of our discipline is to document and describe in a principled scientific manner, or to advance the theory of linguistics based on empirical data. So their perspective is that of linguistics that should lay out the facts about a given linguistic situations or about the structures of a certain language. So linguistic work should be driven by individually driven, scientifically motivated curiosity. So my perspective is that the point here is not whether or not linguists should be should pursue scientific goals, which I guess it's obvious as academic. The point is whether or not those goals should also be accompanied by different goals, more societally oriented goal, more community oriented goals, or not, and to what extent when we work with indigenous and endangered languages. So I'd be curious to know what you think about that. I personally, I am a fan when societally relevant goals and academically relevant goals go hand in hand. Although I am aware that this literally doubles the amount of work of the linguist. And also it's a bit difficult to understand how this hand in hand should actually happen in practical terms. So how do societally relevant goals go hand in hand with academically relevant goals? It's not obvious. So, and there is no one-fit-all solution about it, especially when we work in endangered language communities. Probably the listening part, to be a good listener, to understand the community needs deeply, and to understand their goals deeply is probably the first step. And one should even think about involving the community at the level of the design of the project. Although this is barely possible many times, because of course you wouldn't want to involve community members in a project that is not even funded yet. You don't really know whether it will actually happen, whether you will have the resource to do any work whatsoever. So these kind of negotiations and dialogue, they actually start when a project is granted. And this, as I will say in a moment, it's sometimes a bit problematic. And about that, I would like to share an anecdote about when I was writing a grant application a couple of years ago for the NVO, which is a Dutch organization for scientific research. And I happily applied for one of their grant schemes because they like to, at least in that scheme, to they welcome really societally relevant goals, and they want to hear about your societally relevant goals and what your plan for them as well. Actually, with the same weight of the more academically oriented goals. So when I was writing the applications, which was quite theoretically oriented because it was about describing, well, working on morphological productivity in 3 different indigenous polysynthetic languages. But when I was writing about the societally relevant goals, I wrote in the draft that I was going to negotiate part of my goals with the communities when and if the grant was granted. So when I gave that draft to the editors and to the colleagues, I kind of received in a chorus back a big no onto that section about the negotiation. They told me that as a PI, I shouldn't propose to the funding agency to negotiate anything at all. I should know exactly what to do and why, and I should propose a very solid and very clear plan without negotiation having to happen. So I did what I was advised to. I deleted that section about the negotiation, and but when I got the grant finally, well, it became kind of a joke among colleagues. But what I did is just to go to the communities and start the negotiation. So that's what I did. And I believe that this should be recognized and also taken into account from the funding agencies, because this is needed. The negotiation part is needed. It takes time. It takes a lot of effort. It takes our presence. It takes money. It is unpredictable to a certain extent, especially if we really want to listen to what are the goals and the needs of those communities. So if it is not taken into account, it will end up penalizing the researchers. For example, in my project that was funded, it already in the second years, and we are still like kind of I don't want to say stuck, because we are not stuck, but we are at that level still. So we want to take it very slowly, because we want to understand very well the type of needs that are from the side of the communities we work with. So I really think that negotiation, that's a key word for me, is at the core of decolonization as a process in my research. It makes research more human, and human is a word that Hadley, Montoya, and Malison use in their book of 2024. Decolonize is to humanize, and negotiation makes our approach less aggressive. Obviously, less focus on our priorities and the research priorities of our institutions and funding agencies. It makes that much more open by definition to the needs of the communities. So linguists must pursue scientific goals, but I also think that if we aim at decolonizing our practice, negotiation is one of the steps we should take, which is not compromising our goals. That's also very clear to me, and I think it's quite clear. It's quite important to stress it. Negotiating our goals does not mean that we have to give up or to change forcibly our scientifically oriented and motivated goals. It is something else. It is including perspectives from the communities we work with and goals from the communities we work with. That, of course, is not obvious how to do that. It takes different shapes every time. I'm now going to go to the second argument I take from that Crippen and Robinson paper of the lone wolf, about in defense of the lone wolf approach. What is the point in collaborating if community members are uninterested, not competent in the scientific issues at play, sometimes not even interested in their own language? I see what they mean, and this argument gives me the occasion to mention a quite important point. as I conceive of that, communication with communities does not have to be about the linguistic issues that we are interested in. In fact, it's entirely the opposite. With the point is to shift the focus from those issues and to embrace other issues that maybe we don't have in our radar because we are not from those communities. So the collaboration, it's really a matter of being present and of listening. I can recall that when I was a postdoc and I was working with midship speakers and I was looking at the composition of the word stem, the collaboration at that time resulted in funding a mentor apprentice program. I also have a picture about that program, which I also shared in Helsinki. That was a major success, I believe, at least for me. And these are Kai Pyle and Werner de Montigny teaching and learning midship in a mentor apprentice program, which is a one-on-one language learning program where an elder is paired with an apprentice, so a learner. In that case, we had 2 elders and 2 learners, one more advanced and one a beginner, which gives the possibility to learn in a more naturalistic environment, of course, in immersion. So the collaboration was of the kind that while my focus was on the verb stem, I embedded all the linguistic work within the mentor apprentice, which was the goal of the community members. They wanted to have more advanced second language speakers because that is needed in their situation of the language that is severely endangered. There is a big gap. The fluent speakers have 80 years or more, so there is no community members in the childbearing age anymore. And therefore, the urgent need is that of building more advanced second language speakers to be able to, in that urgent situation, pass on the language. So I believe that the very interesting and creative point of the negotiation is to find that specific connection and balance that could make it work for everybody. That could make it work for the academic who wants to pursue very specific academically relevant goals, and for the community that has more community-oriented goals, and they can intertwine or they can go more parallel. It's always different. Another point, the third point that Crippen and Robinson mentioned in their paper is that most linguists lack training in second language teaching, pedagogy, and educational practices. And therefore, most revitalization activities are symbolic, useless, and a waste of time. And actually, this is a rather poignant argument, I guess, that they make. And I entirely agree with this point. It also connects to what I said at the beginning, my 3 questions about what do we bring in the communities? What is our expertise as linguists? What can we offer? Well, most of us cannot offer expertise in second language teaching, cannot help in revitalization activities. And it's true that many revitalization activities are symbolic, which is not bad in its own, but this is a true point. So there, I guess that we need a change in the culture and in the praxis in our training. This is a point where the SLE or other institutions like that could make a difference if they wanted, in the sense that they could help spreading a change in the culture to help linguists that want to work with endangered and indigenous languages also have training in revitalization, second language teaching, educational practices in general, curriculum building, curriculum development, and educational linguistics, and so on. We need more training for that, and making that training possible, for example, it could be somewhere to start. A 4th point that Crippen and Robinson bring up in their paper is that linguists need to be productive to carry on with their careers, especially junior linguists, and that the collaboration may slow them down, may prevent their career advancement, and therefore may penalize them. This is another argument that I do agree with. It's really dangerous for young linguists to embark in a collaborative project when they know they are at a career stage, when they have to be very productive in terms of publications. Because, as I said in the beginning, negotiation, it's a form of a relation building, and it takes time, it takes effort, and surely slows down research activity as we conceive of them. So for those of us who are precarious or were precarious, engaging in collaboration could be detrimental. That's another point, I guess, where a change in culture is needed, where, for example, we would be welcome if activities related to building up relationships with community and negotiation, collaboration could help young linguists and researchers more in general score point, for example, for their annual reviews, the promotions and the tenure file, for example. Some of it is already happening, so it's encouraging to an extent, but a lot can happen still. And I guess that this is another point where an association like the SLE could somehow make a difference or make a contribution, so to say. Well, at this point, I'd like to start making my interim conclusion for the talk before going to the discussion. But before wrapping up, I want to make a last point and highlight what I think could be a common thread or a key to navigate this very complex scenario. And this has to do with learners. I also mentioned that at the beginning. I mentioned that in Helsinki, and the work with heritage speakers. So the heritage speakers are those individuals who grew up listening and speaking, sometimes to an extent, the local indigenous languages, but otherwise they were socialized in a different language, in a language of wider communication, which is most of the time a colonial language. We as linguists, we know, and this is a kind of expertise that we may bring with us. We know that this group of young bilingual is absolutely vital for the chances of survival of the language, because it's about their choices, what they choose to make, whether they choose to speak the language, whether they choose to pass it on to their children, what are their attitudes toward the language. And all of that will determine whether the language stay or go. Buchholz put it very vividly, so I will quote this sentence from one of her paper, and she says that the cul-de-sac of contemporary documentary linguistics is exactly screening the individuals we work with according to how authentic their involvement with their culture is, which is in turn equal to marginalizing those who failed the language knowledge test, which I also quoted at the very beginning, because I mean, this quote, it's very vivid and it's very telling, at least to me. We don't want to do that, although probably we all have experiences in doing that. And to this respect, I'd like to quote again Bloomfield, and his conceptions and how he described one of his collaborators. In this essay, Bloomfield was actually talking about linguistic intuitions. It's a nice essay. And in this essay, he was talking about how linguistic intuitions are influenced by our background, our ideologies, how they change from speakers to speakers from time to time. He mentioned a White Thunder, and speaks about his language, his menominee. And he says that his menominee is atrocious. The vocabulary is small, the inflections are barbarous. He constructs sentences of a few threadbare models. He may be said to speak no language tolerably. I really like to quote this sentence because it gives mixed feelings, I guess, a number of reactions we can have. We could be empathetic with Bloomfield because we actually have probably thought in similar ways about our collaborators. We choose the ones that are more fluent. Maybe there is a mic open. Okay. We choose linguists are known to go and look for the old traditional fluent speakers because they give maybe more authentic type of information, and they have less doubts about their own languages. So we may be empathetic to that because we may have had those kind of thoughts, and to look for speakers that are of a certain type and maybe avoid the young bilinguals because they do not speak that fluent, or some sort of thought in that direction. We can also be outraged because the way these sentences and these judgments are phrased, it's quite outrageous and very judgmental, very sharp. So one could also question from what kind of perspective could Bloomfield or any other linguist think this way about their collaborators, being not the native speakers himself. It's also, there has been research about how fluency in many indigenous languages is measured in communities, or is what the criteria for fluency or so-called fluency are very different from what are in Western cultures. So it's not about the number of, for example, words, but it's maybe about how sentences are constructed. So there may be different criteria for fluency, and therefore these judgments may be out of place for that reason. We may also have more of a rational response to this quote, and more on the side of the reflexivity, which is to start reflecting on our own ideologies and perspectives when we come into contact with our collaborators and cultures which are different and distant from us. Be sure not to bring our own ideologies to interfere too much with our work. And in contrast to that, I'd like to mention that really work with learners, whether beginners or advanced, it's, I think, an imperative when working with endangered and indigenous languages. It is a versatile kind of area. It allows to be creative, and when one needs to negotiate or wants to negotiate a number of goals with the community they work with, well, this is an area that it's quite easy to play with. Whether the community prefer, for example, to develop something for young first language speakers or for second language speakers, there are a number of possibilities that one could take on. So to wrap up, I want to go back to the very core question I gave at the beginning. Is a research program involving indigenous or endangered languages that is shaped primarily or even exclusively by the goals of the linguist unethical? My response to this question is yes. Yes, a negotiation, as I said, is a key word. Negotiation of research goals is the key for humanizing our research and decolonizing our research. The design of such a program that put together more societally oriented and academic goals is far from obvious. It will slow down our research, may overwhelm young researchers. So it's far from being something easy. And in order to do that and to be supported, to support our young researchers to do that, we need a change in the academic cultures that goes from the granting agencies, continued education for young and senior linguists, look at the criteria for career advancement to include some more points, score points for activities that concern building relationships with communities and the like. So that is from me now. Thank you very much. Grazie. And again, the QR code for the Padlet, if you'd like to comment there or in the chat or just using the microphone. Thank you very much.
Oh, really? Thank you very much for your very nice presentation. I personally really enjoyed it. And I tried to follow on the Padlet whether there were reactions, but I couldn't see. Oh, I see one reaction. Maria, could you help me with Padlet? But everybody can read the Padlet, or should I?
I mean, I posted it. I could also just
Yeah, please, Anne.
explain the question. So thank you very much, Maria. It was really a wonderful talk. So the question I raised on the Padlet is, okay, so fair enough to negotiate the community's need, but what if the community members do not really agree, are divided about their needs? Some people might actually want to preserve the indigenous culture and language, while others rather want to basically get rid of it, want to, let's say, speak the language of the colonizer. So how to negotiate this? I think it's really difficult. So if you're in a position to indeed go and ask for or negotiate this, what do you do when there is no agreement within the community you're working?
Yeah, so thank you very much for raising that point, which is central. It happens in many communities that there is no agreement, and it's also a matter of when we speak about communities, what are we talking about? I mean, communities is not one entity, then one can just address. Communities are composite. They have different types of organizations, multiple members, everyone thinking their own ways, and sometimes in conflict, sometimes in overt conflict within the community. So as linguists, we are not there to lay the facts. We are there and everything we do becomes political. We are also foreigners, and what we do has a weight, a different weight. So we should really tread very lightly, especially when we realize and there is conflict and there is no agreement in the community we work with, to not exacerbate that conflict. It's not easy, and I've witnessed colleagues giving up that kind of work because it was too controversial in the communities they have started working with. Sometimes it's very peaceful and everything goes well. At some other time, very kind of sometimes latent, sometimes more manifest conflicts come in and can make life very miserable for people. So there are very delicate issues, and I guess the only way is to be aware that there could be conflicts, that there are indeed different visions, about the language. For example, what happened with the Michif speaking community when I was working in Canada is that I, like many other community members and other linguists, agreed that a priority at that point was to focus on advanced second language learners, as I also mentioned in the presentation, because of the gap. So fluent speakers had 80 years or more. What could they do to pass on the language? Are they able? Do they have the strength and the energy, the time, even the lifetime to work with the children at this stage? No, the answer was no. Our answer was the elders are not able to pass on the language to first language speakers because that takes too much effort. The elders should urgently help advanced second language speakers, younger one, to become more fluent, for them to be able to carry on the actual reclamation activities that involve a lot of efforts, time. So that was our take, but the political body that actually holds most of the funding and the power did not think that way. They thought that the priority should be the children. And what they thought the priority should be was for elders to visit schools, to teach the children the language. But that would happen very few hours a week. And we as linguists and the more trained community members knew that that could not solve the issue radically, because it would be a sort of a symbolic activities of reclamation and revitalization. And if one wanted really to reroute the language in the community, one should work a different way. So to my understanding, they did not come to an agreement, and being there and internally taking the side of a certain number of people involved in this discussion was not easy. But one should remember that it's not I mean, that what happened to me. I remember myself that it was not my take to take position. I could just assist and be the best ally I could without making too much noise about that. So I think that could be one way to address this very important point.
Thank you.
Well, may I further comment on this? Because I think you actually mentioned one crucial point for saying yes with regard to the question, for the regard to the question in reaction to Crippen and Robinson, namely the issue of revitalization. Well, one scientific project working on endangered languages or indigenous languages should take seriously the perspective of revitalization in order to be funded, for instance. So not only describing the language, but also trying to develop methods for revitalizing it. And I think you showed us a way of changing the inertia of having the usual stuff, namely language course, a few hours of a language course during the school for children and whatsoever, which brings to nothing. Actually, we know it. So it's really a question of involvement into the community, of talking to the people, also arising the interest of the other members of the community, who typically the male one, who are not interested into language, or they don't think that the language is interesting, that because it's not functional, it's not widespread. It's more important to learn another standard language, and etc. etc. All these issues that we know very well, and I think this should be also a way of decolonizing the attitude of researchers going to a community and only describing something, so stealing the knowledge of the language and doing nothing for the support of the language, which is the other part of the issue. It's not simply documenting language diversity, but also trying to maintain language diversity alive, which is the basic point. I don't know if you agree with this.
Yeah, I certainly agree with it. The issue is that we don't really know what communities want, and what communities want is different from communities to communities, and as the comment we just had reminded us, communities may have conflicts about that. So it's not easy to navigate that dynamics, and also I completely agree that there should be some more societally oriented goals together with the descriptive or the theoretically oriented goals of our academic projects. But I also stress that I think that's a key point, that sometimes we do not even have the tools to do that as linguists. So there is a matter of what do we want to bring, and if do we want to matter for those communities? And if we want, what kind of skills should we develop? Apart from our, like, for example, more theoretically oriented knowledges, and the knowledges about the methods and experimental design whatsoever. Maybe there are other skills that we may want to develop as field linguists.
Yeah. Other questions or comments? I don't see anything on Padlet, but yeah, Heva, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. These are all issues that are very close to my own experience and what I worry about. And what I don't see an easy solution to. And of course, it depends on the situation for every language community. I mean, in my case, sort of speakers or even descendants of speakers are scattered over a huge area and mixed with descendants of speakers of other languages, and issues that arise are very much sort of traditional prescriptivism of not liking the Australian language mixed with English, for example, on the part of the oldest people, and then you exclude the younger people. I do feel that because of all the issues that you raised for the field workers' careers and funding issues, there does need to be a move in the research landscape, not just a burden of conscience and the burden of action on the part of all individual field linguists. I mean, each of us can think about possible ways of contributing, but if those things are not deemed worthy of funding or the time that it takes, as you rightly pointed out, and if then the time spent on such efforts is not deemed relevant for getting a position, then it is really difficult.
Yeah, especially when one is precarious. Well, of course, also issues of promotions are relevant, but of course, it's even more urgent when one does not have a stable position. That makes it very, very hard. Yeah, I have seen some moves in that direction, that community oriented, for example, publications are counted to a certain extent. But still there is that imperative of the publications, like the more theoretically oriented or academically oriented, so to say. that has to be respected and makes it quite difficult because, as I also said at the beginning, once you decide that you want to be a listener and that it matters to you to incorporate more community-oriented goals in your project, the amount of work that you have to do doubles. So it's also easy to be overwhelmed by that, I believe.
Yes, in this sense, the question that I see in Padlet is really right. If you want to justice to meeting the community's needs, does it still make sense to expect young scholars to complete a PhD in 4 years based on fieldwork? Yes, I think this is an important issue because, of course, to make fieldwork you need more time, and if you want to make fieldwork, which is also, let's say, involving the community and listening to the community, you need even more time. This is a big problem. Yes, especially because PhD programs are normally supported financially, and and you should apply for more money if you want to stay longer in a community. It's not an easy issue. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, that of the PhD trajectory, it's probably a very important point. Yeah. Yeah.
If I may ask you something, what do you think about the possible utility of digital means or digital perspectives in order to support speakers of local communities, especially young one? Because of course we talk all the time of native digitals, and if you are able to acquire the text of a language on a digital platform, and you can invite or stimulate people, especially young people, to write texts in that language that are then acquired and shared within the community. Do you think it's feasible? Is it a possibility, since we are living more and more in a digital world, or this remains relevant for these communities, or I mean the communities that you have experience with?
No, I think it's absolutely relevant. Young people, at least in the communities that I've worked with, are very much connected, and online and digital. So, but also it's true that in order to build a digital resource, then it depends which one. There are many, but you need a lot of work before being able to do that. So you need at least enough documentation, and then you need a description of the language, and then you need collaboration with software development. It's certainly not something that it's or not really something easy to do in the span of
No, that's true.
one short project. So there kind of maybe more resources should converge into that direction. But I personally think that it could be very relevant. In fact, it's one way of trying to reverse those, or to kind of change those very adverse ideologies towards certain languages that are seen as really outside the modern world and the more digitally oriented world, and having an app or something that could help in that direction is vital. In fact, with one of the case study we are working with in my project in Groningen, it's about Maputongun, and the community. Again, speaking about a community, it's very imprecise, to be fair, but the community members we are working with, they had developed a dictionary, and they wanted us to contribute to elaborate on that dictionary, to make a website, an interactive website for second language learners. for their associations that works primarily online because the community is very spread, and therefore having an online platform with a dictionary to which we are going to add some information about morphological productivity to also help learners learn the very complex, morphologically complex words. Well, this is something they really welcomed. So indeed.
Yes, and I think, I mean, the issue of the writing systems become more and more relevant, because for me, for instance, it's important that people, the communities, develop their own writing. It's not a fact that orthography should be adopted with the scholars consulted about the best option to convey phonemes in terms of grapheme, etc. It should be rather a question of usage-based writing system that people developed, and of course with conflicts, because some people adopt certain way of using signs, other people other ways, and there must be kind of discussion within the community, reach some agreement and debate, etc. But this is very important, I think. If something like this can be put in life, it helps a lot, giving the community the sense of an important moment for the preservation, for vitalization of the language. What do you think? Do you see a kind of development of writing systems for of people in communities, or they simply?
Yeah, of course. And that's absolutely political. Every time there is orthography involved, it becomes political. So it's never objective. It's never, that's how it is. Well, linguists can help in developing a phonologically based orthography, but in the end, if speakers feel that it's easier for them, or that it's more truthful to them to write in a different way, immediately political issues arise. And most of the time, communities have developed their own writing systems, and most of the time within communities there are conflicting ways of writing the language. So that's absolutely important, most of the time controversial. And again, one important point I think I could make to this very discussion is that as linguists, I think we should not think that we can contribute objectively to the discussion, but we always bring a perspective that should stay there together with the others that are present in the community about the language, also when it comes to spelling choices.
Yeah. I see another contribution in the Padlet. We might end in a dead end if research in indigenous languages is not allowed to be performed unethically, namely without contributing to the community. The national funding bodies will simply not fund it at all, because why their taxpayers must pay to support some communities elsewhere if there is a choice to fund research which doesn't raise any ethical issues? I have no answer, just want to show the paradox.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I also have no answer to that, but yeah, I think research in general should not be allowed to be performed unethically, but no one will prohibit, I guess, a linguist to go without a if they do not have. I mean, I cannot see the other. I mean, the complete opposite situation where a linguist is not allowed to work on a language unless they have a societally oriented goal or a connection to the community. More so, I see that if there is a change in culture from the side of the funding bodies, they will encourage researchers to include those goals. They will never say something like, if you don't have them, do not go. I mean, I cannot see this kind of opposite situation where, yeah, I don't see that happen. If there is a change in the culture, then the national funding bodies will just encourage researchers who want to work on endangered language communities to negotiate and to open a dialogue with the communities they work with as a natural step. And then they will fund it because they think that's the fair way to go. I don't know what you think.
Well, in my view, I mean, the main issue is language preservation in terms of preservation of diversity, which is the most important thing in international terms. And in this sense, would be nice whether there will be a kind of ideological change. If you want to apply for money for documenting languages, then you should also include into your projects also a part about the language preservation, namely, and language preservation can be carried out only if you adopt this kind of view, in the sense of decolonizing, the approach in which you simply develop a writing system from above, from outside of the community, and give a full description of the language, etc. You should also try to develop methods to become part of the community and convince the community to preserve their language and to stimulate the use of their language in different social linguistic settings, I would say, not only in familiar context, but also more than this, and to transmit the language to the children, of course. And in this sense, this could be a kind of ideological change in the way how projects are funded, for instance. If you don't have this kind of part, then we will not support your project. This might be, but it's very difficult to because of course the different countries have different ways for funding research, science in general. So it's not so easy.
And also researchers, sometimes they do not know what they will learn about those communities. So maybe maybe it's something they cannot predict. And that's a point, for example, I encountered, because in that way you have to write in your applications for funding that you will have to negotiate based on the conditions I understand this is may open the way to some unpredictability, and of course funding agencies, they do not like that, because if they open to unpredictability, they may not get what they wanted or what they expect from the researcher to produce. But in this specific case of indigenous and endangered languages, I think that some openness to unpredictability should be accepted, because it's a very specific case.
I see another comment. Something we can do, we can all do, is recruit, train, support students, researchers who are actually members of their community. It doesn't mean that they will be immune from the pressures, research publication versus community efforts, diverse attitudes, needs within the community, but they will in a much better position to identify areas for collaboration and to negotiate at least some of the pitfalls.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but
that's a key point. And it's not always easy. When I was hiring for my project, that was my goal, of course. I succeeded in one case, not in the other. And that indeed, and also something Anna Maret mentioned in Helsinki, how the insider view, which, as the comment says, that does not protect you from that pressure. In fact, it's a very difficult position to be in. But certainly the insider view is a plus. It gives you much more immediate access to the community perspective. Your social network is vital to the research. People trust you much more. You don't have that such a long time for building relationships because you are from the community. That makes it so much easier, so much fair, and indeed should be one of the goals. I fully agree with the comment.
So, any further comments or questions or curiosities? I don't see reactions from the audience, so I think we can slowly come to the end and thank again our speaker. I think I really enjoyed the lecture, really, and the discussion, especially for those like me who are involved more or less in fieldwork, even though not in such exotic places, but the problems are more or less the same. And in this sense, it was really great to discuss about these issues, issue of decolonizing our research, or to changing mentality, I would say, of changing mentality with regard to our research goals, our relation with the speakers, with informants, and this is very important. And in this sense, it's very helpful to have this kind of meeting in order to become aware that people are reflecting on this and suggesting something new. So really, thank you for your contribution. And well, it was great to have several people attending the meeting. And as I said at the beginning, this is recorded and will be put on the YouTube channel of the SLE if we manage to have access to it, but I'm confident that we will. So I thank you for being here, and thank you, Maria, for Maria Mazzoli, for this nice
Thank
talk.
you.
Mille grazie. And I think we can stop here and meet again the next spring lecture that, as I said, will be held by Alessandro Lengi. He's professor for computational linguistics in Pisa. And we will try to convince him to discuss something more specific about distributional semantics, namely digital tools for understanding something of our natural languages. So thank you very much, and see you numerous in the next lecture. Bye.